A big part of my career has been looking at the therapeutic value of the 12 steps because the 12 steps really have harnessed some powerful psychological forces that creates an amazing change in our life. What is that change? Well, the truth is that the 12 steps are engineered to help us achieve emotional sobriety, to achieve true independence of spirit, to achieve autonomy, to learn how to take care of ourselves. These are things that we don't know. Emotional sobriety really helps us learn how to have a healthy relationship, how to have union with the preservation of our integrity, how to cooperate with integrity. Most of us get lost in our relationships. Most of us do a lot of things we don't want to do. We don't really know how to show up in a good way. Emotional sobriety is about learning to have healthy relationships.
Herb is going to take the lead tonight. So without any further ado, welcome back, Herb Kagan. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Alan and Roger and everybody who supports this gathering to talk about emotional sobriety. I have a new person in my life, and we were having dinner tonight, and she was asking me, so what really is emotional sobriety? And I didn't want to give her a 3-hour lecture, so I tried to distill it. And the best I could come up with just spontaneously is it's a conscious management of my emotions, a conscious management of my emotions so that I have a continuous growth in the balance of my relationships with life, with self, and with others. I've been very focused on that balance of relationships, relationships being a synonym for spirituality, relationships with life itself, whatever that means to each of us, with myself and with others, that relationship in terms of our humanity. The chapter that I've been asked to make some comments on, and Roger's been making some comments on it, and if Alan did, I missed it. I've been traveling quite a bit, is chapter 9, Living Life on Life's Terms. And it sounds so simple. It's kind of like, duh. And yet, once I became conscious enough, I realized that that wasn't how I was living my life on life's terms. I was attempting to, as the big book suggests, wrest satisfaction out of this world by trying really hard, by knowing a lot better, by getting up earlier and staying up later. And Kathy, thank you for reading and having that little dialogue. I just made a note of what the overall objective of all of this is. Of all of this talk and all of this effort that we talk about in spirituality and 12-step programs in psychology and therapy, it's about freedom. If we were to distill it down into its essence. And I'm impressed with the letter written in 1956. Bill was 22 years sober. So he got free of his addiction 22 years earlier, 1934. But 20 plus years later, he's beginning to deal with his awareness of a lack of freedom with regard to his relationships with life, with others, and with himself, that dependency that he talks about. Now, each of our timeline is going to be very different, but keep in mind that maybe model of Bill that we get free from our addiction at some point early on, thanks to grace and our willingness and perhaps the 12-step process. We get free from our addiction. That's the first half of the first step. But at what point do we get free, or at least in proper balance and management of our unmanageability, the second half of the first step. That's a real question. Addiction is one bondage. Those first 9 steps are about freedom from that addiction. Page 84, if you're interested, says we are placed, Grace, in a position of neutrality by the end of the 9th step. But it very clearly says immediately on the same page that we're not cured and we have a daily reprieve. My conclusion and interpretation is of our unmanageability. Now, I became aware of that 5 years sober, but I didn't get my arms around it for 12 years, over the next 12 years, going through those steps 3 different times with 3 different men that allowed me to progressively become more conscious of my unconsciousness. I was, as Gurdjieff says, asleep, dreaming that I was awake, completely unaware of even the meaning of that phrase. And thanks to Dr. Berger and the introduction to the letter and the work that we've been doing over the last 20 years, I've become very aware that life just is. No, this is not simplistic. This is not attempting to be cute or new agey or life just is. Reality just is. And there's certain mechanical rules involved in this material reality as it evolves. Sometimes we call them principles of physics. Sometimes we call them principles of humanity. Sometimes we call them spiritual principles. But there are innate organic forces that are driving the evolution of material reality. And the words I'm using these days now, because of the work and quite frankly, this panel over the last 3 years, it's completely matured my consciousness and my ability to articulate it, going through the steps and then going through Brandon's book on self-esteem and now going through Dr. Berger's book on emotional sobriety. It's been developmental organically for me. Life is immutable. It doesn't change. It just grinds forward, manifesting, evolution, manifesting. It's not negotiable. It's completely impersonal. It just grinds evolution forward. That's the key thing that we begin to wake up to, at least I did, and those around me begin to have this experience. Reality in life is not personal. It just is. Now, people, circumstances, and events are happening. My reaction to them is personal. It's my reaction to them. And I am 100% responsible for my reaction. Not responsible at all. Usually zero responsibility for people, circumstances, and events. It's all just happening. And everybody's in the same place of reacting to life as it manifests. One of the things that Dr. Berger points out, and so did Bill in step 7, is that we're powerless. Over our unmanageability. So what do we have power over? Because we do have free will. Not free in addiction. First half of the first step. Not free in managing my life. Unmanageability, second half of the first step. Well, where are we free? Now, I'm coming from the perspective of, the philosophy of, and the theology of the big book, full disclosure, which I've embraced as the truth. Bill says it prophetically and mystically on page 53. God is or God isn't. What is your choice? Oh, I don't have any choice over my addiction. When I use, I lose control. When I don't use, I eventually use. Powerless, no choice. And even when I'm given the gift of, hear that, gift of grace, connected in some mysterious way to my willingness, to freedom from the addiction, my life is unmanageable. And he says on page 62, and we can't even reduce it much by wishing or trying on our own power. I believe it with all my heart because it's my experience, not because it was an academic logical conclusion. I just look back over my shoulder at 5 years of freedom from addiction, and I was restless, irritable, and discontented because I was attempting to manage life by knowledge and effort and willpower and prayer and meditation even. No, each of us is conditioned in certain ways. Dr. Berger talks about throughout the book, of course, and we talk about throughout our panel and throughout our discussion about expectations and shoulds. These are all preconditioned in us. It's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. My inclinations are not my fault, but it is my responsibility. My behavior, sometimes before I know that I don't know, is not my fault, but it is my responsibility. All of that came to me at about 12, 15 years of sobriety as I was continuing to navigate these steps to embrace step 11 consciousness practice into my daily routine and to grow, as the big book suggests, in understanding and effectiveness, to come to a point where then I was confronted with the truth of reality just is. And one of the authors I read, I forget her name right now, said, reality just is reality, but only 100% of the time. Now it's cute, but it's deep wisdom. We're conditioned by our instincts, by our family, by our culture, by our interpretation of reality, and by our experience. And all of that is grist for the mill of dealing with coming to the truth. And at 10 years of sobriety, this man said, Herb, you have a lot of information, but you have very little transformation. You need to pray to have set aside your information and your experience. Because your information and your experience, as good as it is not good enough to crack the code or to part the curtain of knowing what you don't know. And you can be delivered to a place you don't even know exists. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew that he did. And I did what he suggested. And I had the experience of the curtain parting. That set-aside attitude, not because I set it aside, because I'm as powerless to do that as I am powerless in my addiction and powerless in my unmanageability. Dr. Berger talks about that. Learning how to roll with the punches. This is like acknowledging reality as it's manifesting, acknowledging it, and then accepting it, and then adjusting to it. Now I like to discuss the problem, but I also like to discuss the solution. For me, that's the solution, acknowledging what I'm just saying as the truth, accepting it. It has nothing to do with me even understanding it. But to accept that, reality just manifests, and my responsibility is to adjust to it. Reality will never adjust to me. It's not personal. It's not about fair. It's not about should. That word that we've bantied about a lot, which is the key to unlock any doubt about whether or not we have delusional beliefs, unrealistic motives, self-centered motives. When we use the term should, think it, feel it, say it, it's a signal. We're in territory that is fanciful, not real. I am not the center of life. That was a huge, what do you call it? Epiphany. Not that I was conscious of it or ever thought that I was God, but I really acted that way. And the big book suggests right at the beginning of step 3, we need to quit playing God. I can't control anything. It was at that time that I jettisoned the word control. I don't use the word control other than to tell people I don't use the word control. There's no control. There's no control, at least as I perceive it and interpret it. Every aspect of life is not in my control at all. No aspect. I have influence. That's what that serenity prayer is all about. Serenity prayer, the prayer, I believe, of emotional sobriety. What's real? What can I influence? That's the word I use, not control. I need to grow in wisdom to know what I can influence and what I can't influence. That's wisdom. And I get the wisdom by making mistakes and course correcting. The more conscious I am, the less mistakes I make, the more effective are my corrections. Consciousness is the key to freedom. Consciousness is the key to freedom. Why is a good question, but not really here in human development and or my own personal relationship with life. Why is not the right question? What can I do? What can I do? That's a really good question. What do I need to know? That's even a better question. What are the principles? When I'm working with the people that ask for help, I ask them eventually to ask themselves, what's the operating principle here? Like gravity is a principle of physics. Immutable, non-negotiable, incontrovertible. Doesn't matter what I want or think or feel or know or need. The law of gravity just operates the way it does. Perhaps I suggest to people there are other principles. Bill suggests practice these principles in all our affairs. Never gives us a list, but gives us lots of material for us to chew on to kind of like come to grips with what are the principles that work in our lives. And he suggests perhaps the key one in chapter 5, how it works, rigorous honesty, rigorous honesty. No such thing as a white lie. Rigorous honesty, transparency. You can do anything you want. I tell the people that I work with, you can do anything you want, as long as you're willing to pay the price of the consequences. Alignment is the term I use. It's not in the big book, but it's the term I use about this emotional sobriety, about turning my will and my life over to the care of at the beginning of step 3, alignment, to be in alignment with reality as it's manifesting. I need to be in alignment with, I'm not the center of the world, but I am the center of my world. And I need to accept that agency, that responsibility. And I have free will to be able to do that and to know that I don't have the power to do that on my own power. Now, the big book suggests God as I understand it. Recently, in the last couple of years, I've been using the phrase God as I don't understand it. I mean, that's 40 years later. I've come to the mystery of giving up on any concreteness at all in any of this. Dr. Berger talks about the best in us, managing the worst in us. The Buddhists talk about the higher self or versus the lower self. The psychologists talk about the true self and the false self. We're all talking about light and darkness. I heard a speaker say, darkness is merely the absence of light. And so I've been using that as the metaphor of the human journey. I want to walk in the light, and I'm capable of walking in the light, but it's going to take some understanding of reality itself and of me and of human nature, yours and mine, and some practice. Practice life, making progress in my practice on a daily basis, making progress by my daily practice of consciousness. I'll end with this. One of my teachers says, welcome life. What a great phrase. Obviously, positive psychology, obvious gratitude. These are some of the words that we use all the time. We need to become very conscious of our words. The serenity prayer, for instance, blah, 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 blah. When we pray, if we pray, or even the word powerless. Oh, I'm powerless, people, places, and things. Please listen to the words. Yes, I'm powerless over people, places, and things. That doesn't even make any sense. Please. People, circumstances, and events. Yeah, that makes sense. But powerless, what does that mean? I've come to a place almost of having goosebumps every time I think about the word now. Because essentially I'm at jeopardy at every moment of my life on my own power, and I don't know that I don't know, and I can't see that I can't see, even though I think I do see and that I do know. And I need to be in relationship with the power beyond myself, a power other than human power, a power deep within me that is in fact a unsuspected inner resource, using the words from Appendix 2. Welcome reality. Continue to hold that, hope that doing the next indicated thing and being accountable, transparently accountable to somebody or more than one person has worked for me for 40 years. And I have a life that flourishes, a quality life. To live in the light and to practice living in the light, to become a lantern, keeping the lens clean, improving the flame in the lantern, and when I'm helping others, realizing that the lantern enlarges. My lantern, my capacity for compassion grows. And I'm able then to navigate the speed bumps of life using those shock absorbers to handle those speed bumps with some dignity and some elegance. Thanks, Dr. Berger, for writing the book and for creating this panel. That's enough out of me.
Well, Herb, welcome back. You know, what you said is so true. Your clarity and your thinking on this subject has just been refined and polished over the years with this. And so, you know, that's a testimony to what happens here, right? Is that as we experience emotional sobriety, we evolve with it. And
Yes.
we evolve in terms of our clarity about seeing things, how we see things, how we look at things, our relationship to experiences in our life. I mean, it turns our world on its head, doesn't it, in some way? It- um, you know, I like that about what Father Richard Rohr says, right? Is that how a certain truth can turn the world on its head.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what is happening here. We're turning certain things on its head and seeing things in a very different way that, you know, Bill called it an impossible way of life. But I love how you talked about this as a consciousness, a conscious management of our experience.
Yeah.
And it's so true because one component of that, and I wanted to emphasize this when you started to talk, is that we end up getting freedom by realizing we're not free.
That's right.
This thing, these things, the paradox continues to blow my mind all the time because it is a paradox, right? It doesn't seem to be natural for it to happen this way, but yet it couldn't be more natural that that's the way it is. That as soon as I own it and see that I am the determined one, I can now become the one who's making the determination instead of being determined.
Yeah.
That I can, like you said, there's a difference between influence and control.
Yes.
I can influence things, I can make a choice, but that might be as far as my influence goes.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's going to change something out there. It's definitely going to change my experience of it. I can influence my experience. Sometimes I can influence what's going on around me. You know, it's not like we can't do that. You know, that's what Seligman taught us about learned helplessness.
Right. Right.
Is learned helplessness is when you believe you have no influence,
Right.
when in fact you do. And that's also an error, right? In terms of life, right? Sometimes we're passive about something where, you know what? If I try to do something about this, I might be able to make an impact, let's say on my
Right.
relationship that I thought was not intractable, right? Was not going to change or stuff like that. So it's really an interesting thing because the Serenity Prayer does capture both of that. It helps us sort out what we can and what we cannot, what we can influence, what we can't influence. And that is it, and that changes in our life too, doesn't it, Herb?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
You know, that's also an evolution, and that's why these things, what is true now in your life may not be true 5 years from now. It can look very different in 5 years. You can look very different. Your experience can. I mean, you know, if we quantified somehow how you got from where you were to where you are today, we would be all boggled. I mean, in terms, our minds would be blown, right? How does that happen? Well, by steady, conscious awareness of what's going on and continuing to keep yourself pressed up against new information so you can learn. And that's what you've done. See, in all the time I've witnessed you, you haven't rested on your laurels. And that's an important thing for all of us to hear, right? Is we don't ever get there. It's about always becoming, not getting there. It's about becoming and growing along these lines, you know. Bill had such wisdom when he says we claim spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my book that Hazelton published, I came to a line that captures that. The journey is the destination.
Exactly true. Right on. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate your contribution.
Thank you.
Well, next week we're going to be in London.
Yes, sir.
That's so exciting, man. We're going to be at reimagining recovery. And there's still some Zoom. There is a possibility to Zoom the conference, which is an amazing conference. I'm sure Patrick will put in I'm sorry, not Patrick, but Tom will put in the chat how to reach Patrick McAteer and how to go ahead and sign up for the Zoom if they'd like to join us and not have to fly over with us.
Yeah, it's going to be a very powerful experience for us and a real opportunity to make visible this message.
And Raj, because of that, I was going to ask you if you could pull out your notes one more time. One more week on this topic, and then I'll wrap it up the week after that.
For next week, another sure, if that would fit into the bigger picture, sure.
Get into the picture because Herb and I will be out on the town in London.
I love it. One of the things I'll talk about, which I didn't get to, is practical tools for pursuing humility, right? More how to rather than what is it and all that stuff. So sure, I'll be glad to do that. Yeah.
So do you have some comments on what Herb shared? And
yeah, thank you, Herb, very much. That was a lifetime, at least an adult lifetime of the culmination I experienced, whatever you speak of, many decades, man, of hard work, right? Hard cognitive effort and work and behavioral work to arrive at the knowledge and understandings you have. So, and I always appreciate how you personalize it, for yourself in terms of your experience and the changes you've seen for yourself. Yeah, you mentioned emotional sobriety, that one piece of it is conscious management of our emotions and our emotional experience, and the term itself, emotional sobriety, right? It lends itself to that. It's becoming and being able to become more sober with regard to our own emotions and just how much in possession of us a given emotion is at a given moment in time. Because as we all know, both emotions we evaluate as positive and both emotions we evaluate as negative can take up a huge amount of space inside our being and inside our psyche when they're strong enough. I came to the decision a few years ago, which I practice better sometimes than others, that I never want to make important decisions when I'm in the grip of an intense emotion,
Right.
positive or negative.
Yeah.
Right? They can both lead me to have a lot of regret. I also, just in terms of balance, which you mentioned briefly as well at the beginning, and I've spent a lot of time devoted over the course of my life and career to this. Some of us learn to overmanage our emotions, right? It's not that we have insufficient management of them, but we learn to incredibly overmanage our feelings. So we are essentially numb to much that goes on within us and around us and other people and so on. Now, that closing ourselves off to our emotional experience, I wouldn't necessarily consider that conscious management of our feelings, but I just want to speak to the idea of balance. We can go either way toward having our feelings run our lives for the most part, and having our intellects run our lives so much that we're disconnected from our emotional awareness and our awareness of our body and so on. So again, the idea of balance is one that I always try to want to keep reintroducing in these discussions that we have. A couple other thoughts. I remember many decades ago when I was in Nathaniel Brandon's groups, working on my own issues and my own growth. A couple of things came up while you were talking, and I heard one of them was his thought that you emphasized, that we are each free at all times to do whatever we want, whatever we choose to do. And I don't mean free in some grandiose sense, like that we're not influenced by all kinds of factors in our lives, because we are powerfully influenced. But I mean in the sense of free to be impulsive or free to be more reflective, free to choose A or free to choose B, choose to be as conscious as I can be or choose to be as unconscious as I can be. So the way he put that is do whatever you want. You get to do whatever you want. And he even had this little sign up on the wall of his group therapy room for a while. You get to do whatever you want. Take what you want and pay for it. Not the other way around. Do whatever we want. Take whatever we want. Do whatever we want. And then we get to experience the consequences of that choice. Now, I may block those out as much as I can, or I may be very open to seeing them and experiencing them. But that's a different way of saying the point that you were making, right? We're free to choose.
Yeah.
But our choices, all of them, you know, whether I eat my mashed potatoes first or my peas first on my dinner plate probably doesn't matter that much. But other choices I make can matter incredibly for myself in my life. So all of our choices have consequences. He also had us do a meditation that I thought was very interesting once. He talked about, and it's very relevant to life on life's terms, I think. He said, here's what I want you to think in terms of. I want you to think about tomorrow morning when you wake up. I want you to take a few minutes, think about what you need to do today, and that's more in the camp of life's on life's terms, and then think about what you'd want to do today. And I found that over the last decades a very helpful way for me to kind of clarify. Because the want, well, that's about me, right? That's about what I want, what I feel, either my want of the moment, if it's a feeling or an impulse, or what I want in a larger sense in terms of my deeper values or the kind of person I want to be and all of that kind of stuff. But he talked about the importance of balance in those two ways of thinking about what, you know, lies before me in my day to come, or my month to come, or my year to come. What do I need to do? What is reality asking me to do or insisting that I do if I want to move a certain direction or accomplish a certain goal? No matter if I feel like it or not, no matter if I'm in the mood or not, no matter if I'm hungry, angry, sleepy, whatever, right? What do I need to take care of as best I can today? And then also making room for what I want to do. You know, and often those can be the same. Often they can be the same, right? Just as learning that some of my shoulds can also be my wants, and then trying to transform those shoulds into a felt experience and a felt belief of, you know, that really is something I want now in my life. And I'm willing to do X, Y, and Z for, not just something that I think I should do. And the last thing I'll mention is, Alan, you talk a lot about the problem is not the problem as we normally identify our problems. The problem is really our response to the problem. And that simple idea has been coming to me over and over and over in recent weeks or months, even when I'm thinking about a problem that I'm facing. I take a few seconds to try to step back from that part of me that's real up close and personal, right, with that problem. And I try to step back, again, sometimes much more successfully than others. And I think, oh, I'm responding to this problem with, for instance, a whole lot of drama, a whole lot of anger, a whole lot of anxiety or fear, you know, a whole lot of hopelessness or helplessness. It's like, how am I going to respond to all those feelings that are coming up in me and create a closer distance, if you will? How am I going to look at how I'm responding to the problem and realize, oh my God, what would a different response be? See, that's the power of it for me, Alan. But to do that, I have to what? I have to step back a little bit, which is very hard if I've got really intense emotions about what's going on. You know, if it involves people I love and care about or issues that I feel very strongly about and so on. But that idea of the real problem is how I'm responding and what other responses might be possible for me. What other responses might be more helpful to me and to others. So I'll finish on that note, but that's a very powerful idea to step back and consider our possibilities for response. Yeah.
And in that context, that's where accountability, that's a fancy word for just telling somebody who has credibility and will tell you the truth, what you're thinking and or
Yeah.
feeling, so that you can at least get an attempt to get an objective evaluation of what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, because I'll be the last person to be objective about my subject.
Yeah. That's exactly right. It can really help me being open, soliciting and being open to the feedback from others can be really, really helpful. And in a way, that's also part of the process of stepping back and reflecting, you know, trying to see it differently.
Right.
But I'm allowing or even requesting another person to help me.
Yeah.
And I so appreciate how you keep going back to that, Herb, that other people and our willingness to be open to the feedback from other people is a critical piece of all of this that can really get lost in our focus on excessive emotional dependency and trying to like avoid that.
Yeah.
Our deep-seated connection with and reliance on other people can easily be missed, and it's not good to miss it, right? It's a real important piece.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Oh, by the way, Kathy, I was in Lafayette, and I now know what crawfish is, and etouffee, and boudin, and crackling. None of those words did I know connected to food that I never tasted.
Well, let's invite Tom in and see if he's got a comment, and then maybe open it up for one or two shares.
Thank you, folks. Some great conversation around this chapter and this topic. You know, where I'm at with this right now is, you know, it's very personal. It's very personal for me this week. I am experiencing kind of a trifecta of issues. One is my daughter in her young careers experienced a big setback in her professional life. And my dog has more health issues. My second kid has more health issues. She's in the emergency room. She collapsed this morning. And on top of that, I've got my own health issues, going to see a surgeon tomorrow. And what I'm experiencing, you know, especially around my daughter's stuff and some of the, as well as some career stuff myself, is how do I take it personal enough to address it, right? Like, what's my responsibility? You talked about that, you know, having perspective and bouncing it off other people, Herb. You know, and as the other piece of it is experience it, feel it. Like, I have perspective. My daughter's healthy. She did not murder anybody. She's not in jail. She's not addicted to drugs. You know, she had a career setback. It's devastating for her. It doesn't feel good to us. But then if I start to project out that perspective, so it negates the disappointment that I actually feel, right? Then I start to you do what I love to do, which is avoid. Right, avoid, escape, run, or the things that I've used throughout my life, and why I love drugs and alcohol so much. So how do I appropriately feel and experience and put these things in perspective, and also allow my other family members to go through their process of feeling and being devastated and disappointed and the like, but not getting caught up in the groundswell of their emotions. Like, this is where the emotional sobriety rubber meets the road, right? It's like, how do I, moderate all of that? And it's been a real, interesting week, kind of observing that. It's like, I feel bad, but listen, at 23 years old, it's not like I had my shit together either, and it took a while for me to develop professionally and personally to be able to manage life out there. And so I try to give my daughter the same grace that was afforded me, at that age, while also trying to help her, like, hey, this is a good opportunity. Review what happened, right? Where did you fall short, and and can you take some action on this and improve your behavior and your skills in a working environment. But then leave it at that. Like, how do I not then stand over her shoulder to make sure she does all of those things I just suggested to her from my years of wisdom and what I learned, and then how do I not be a hypocrite and turn around and go to work and do the same thing, with shirk responsibility and lean into opportunities that have given me instead. So it's just a fascinating life this sobriety and then emotional sobriety offers. It's it's just to use it, or I have to be aware, I have to be awake, and when that happens, it's like, wow, this is all going on around me and inside of me, and have I picked up these skills along the way to deal with them appropriately? And as you said, like, this meeting, 4 years of study in this area of spiritual and psychological and emotional behavior and action has paid dividends. I don't know if I'm any better, but I'm very different.
Does someone need to believe in God to successfully overcome addiction? Well, the way I like to think about what the program does, it connects us to who we really are. And what does that mean? Well, there's this incredible force in you and I, this growth force. It's the force that moved us from crawling to walking. You wanted to take those first steps. And when you fell, and you fell a lot of times, you didn't let your failures stop you. You picked yourself up, you learned from it. And how many times did you fail before you walked? You failed as many times as you needed to. You see, that force, I call it a biological imperative, a psychological imperative, a spiritual imperative. It's moving you towards wholeness. It's moving you to be what you can be. Just like in the acorn is all the information it needs to become an oak tree. In you is all the information you need to become you. Become a you that can cope with life and to deal with whatever you need to deal with to be okay. And that's what I'll talk about in my new book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety.